So anyway, the shame-free zone, you're going to talk today about love, lust, and romance in the age of Me Too.
Yes.
So tell me, maybe we could begin with, why did you pick that particular topic? Why, for people who maybe aren't sure, why is that so prevalent today? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm just excited to hear about the spiritual aspects that you bring into your sexuality training. That's because I'm all about that, the holistic approach. I am so tired of sex being over in this what I call the sexual ghetto, and because I really think it should be the through line in every aspect of our lives, including our spirituality. So
I love that. And many spiritual practices avoid sex. They will not talk about it. It's like the taboo. It's the dark side. So you're right on in terms of that.
Yeah, I think they do that because it's competition.
Oh, well, that's another topic. But why did you select this topic, framing it in terms of what's happening kind of within and post the Me Too revolution?
Here's what happened for me. I since I work with clients, I get to see what's up for people right now today, like what's real for them. And it was becoming really apparent to me that men were kind of getting frightened to make the first move. I get a lot of messages, email, social media from men who are like, well, I'm just not even going to compliment a woman anymore. And I'm not going to initiate a kiss on the first date or the second or the third date. She'll have to initiate. And so there's kind of this terror that nobody wants to talk about. And then on the other side of this, a lot of women kind of enduring, putting up with sex that they hate with their boyfriends and their husbands. And it's just become really apparent to me, even when I read about the Me Too moments, which I've had plenty of them, trust me. I'm at once cheering these brave women on for telling their stories. I think it's so important to be calling out the sexist culture that has been impacting women in a negative way. But we don't seem to have a way forward on this. We don't seem to have a way to get past the shaming of anybody, particularly men, but anybody who's violated boundaries. I don't think shame is ever the solution to anything. And the originator of the Me Too hashtag, Tarana Burke, initially had said, last year, she was saying, or maybe it was even 2 years ago, she said, finally, the shame is being taken off the women and put where it belongs, which is on the men. And I just thought, oh, that is such a big mistake. We don't need to transfer the shame. We need to heal the shame and move past that.
I agree.
And I'm happy to say that just recently, like within the last 3 months, Tarana Burke actually has said now that she wants Me Too to be a movement for men as well. So this is the other thing that I'm discovering. I started facilitating a group for men about Me Too last year and discovered that first they came in with all kinds of guilty confessions, but then eventually they started remembering being violated themselves. And there's a way in which I think all of us, regardless of our gender, have experienced sexual perpetration of some sort, some way in which our boundaries have been eroded, some way in which our no hasn't been honored, some way in which we just didn't even have a no. And I really want to explore how men sometimes choose to have sex because they think they're supposed to and not because they want to. I want to get us to a place where we're having beautiful, joyful sex that is completely consensual and conscious.
Hear ye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, transferring, even saying, and I don't follow her in particular, but even saying, let's take the shame and let's unearth it from men. Yeah. Then where are you going to throw that ball next? Because you're still using shame as a weapon and you're still victimizing people.
And
right?
we're using shame is silencing us. So,
Yes.
one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, what do you need to know before you even can assert a boundary?
I like that.
I think it's really important that we understand how we have shamed ourselves, how we're relating to our sexuality in ways that are less than healthy. If you don't actually connect with that, if you haven't made that journey to really understand what you like, what you don't like, without it being somehow or another kind of perverted by shame and a lot of prescriptions, like you should do this, you shouldn't do that,
Mm-hmm.
then it's kind of hard to assert a boundary because you're confused. And a lot of times what will happen is like, no, okay, maybe, yes, no, I don't think so. Um, and then perhaps afterwards, oh, why did I do that? Or no, I don't think I really wanted to do that. Did I really want to do that? So this confusion, it's going to happen if you haven't gotten clear on your relationship with your sexuality. So that's really the first place, isn't moving into having great assertion skills. It's about having clarity about how you relate to your own sexuality, and cleaning out that closet, getting like, where is it that I'm confused? Where is it that I'm conflicted? Where is it that I have desires that go this direction and then that go in that direction? How do I feel about myself sexually? So really, we have to heal our shame. We have to move past our shame before we even really can have a solid boundary.
So this is going to sound silly, but you're kind of like the Marie Kondo of shame. Like decluttering ourselves. We talk about that here, decluttering ourselves around the pieces of shame that are stuck and throwing them out or organizing them properly.
Right. Well, so if you're going to come out of the closet,
and clean it up.
like, let's say you don't even know that you like some forms of BDSM, and then you get kind of drawn into it, not consciously. Somebody kind of seduces you into it. There's a really good chance that on the other side of that, you're going to have a lot of remorse. And you might even feel like you were tricked or coerced. So I don't think we can have a conversation about consent unless we can have a conversation about our own internalized shame. Once you get clear on that, and you know, and you're sure that you know how you feel about things, then it's a lot easier to navigate that terrain about when somebody has violated your consent.
So you prepared a list of questions for me to ask you, and we're totally in the moment, which is what I prefer. But yes. I want to honor that you have a lot to share with us today, and you've talked about what do you need to know in terms of your boundaries.
Right.
You also have this really interesting pivotal question: why sexual shame sabotages both sexual desire and sexual boundaries. Say more about that. About desire. It's such an interesting issue that we face as sex coaches all the time with our clients.
Right. Well, so for some of my clients, I have found that if they are ashamed of some of their desires, they can actually project those onto their partner. So that's kind of a difficult thing. If you can't claim your sexual desire because you feel ashamed of it, then you probably are going to project it onto other people. And that's not a good place to be coming from if you want to have boundaries. If you want to assert a boundary, you actually kind of need to know where you are and where the other person is. I mean, that's the whole concept of boundaries, right? I begin and end here, you begin and end there. So, but if I can't make that distinction because I am shame-based, then it's going to be really difficult for me to own what is mine. And in some ways, this actually, Patti, kind of goes into the whole idea of codependency too, that where there's this conflation between you and I. And if I don't also understand some of the scripts from my childhood, I can start putting those on my partner. Maybe it's something about my daddy. Maybe it's something about my mother. And there's ways in which I have gotten very confused at this point. It's not just about me and this other person anymore.
Well,
So
that's imago therapy in a nutshell.
right? I
Which
am
is
a
such a
Harville
great,
Hendrix fan.
I mean, it's such a great pathway to understanding the relationships we're in. And I remember years ago studying with John Gray, who used to say 90% of what's happening in your relationship is from the past. Only 10% is right now.
Right.
And so that the ghosts of our childhood patterns, our belief systems, and the shaming that we carry. And I believe we carry shame in our DNA as well, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And well, now with epigenetics, we know that we've got trauma that's intergenerational. It's going from
Yes.
generation to generation, whether you ever met the people that came before you or not. So,
Exactly.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's wound in the DNA helix.
Yeah. So, and that's really something, that's an encouraging thing, Patty. If we heal our shame as individuals, we're actually healing the planet and the human species. So it's a big undertaking.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm curious about something. What motivated you in the very beginning of your work to move toward this as your as where your this is your focal point. This is the center of your work. What got you there? I'm curious about that, and I'll bet everybody here is too.
It's doing my own work. I was raised in a very conservative, right-wing Christian cult, which was incredibly sex negative. And the interesting thing about that sex negative is it also created lots of opportunity for perpetration. So having grown up in a religious soup, I had a grandmother that was a Mormon, a grandmother that was Assembly of God, which is Pentecostal, and my mother belonged to the Worldwide Church of God. So here I was as a child in this religious soup. I read the Bible from cover to cover when I was 12, hoping to have a religious awakening, because I am a very spiritual person. But instead, no offense to anybody out there who may like the Bible, it didn't work for me. I felt really repulsed. And I realized it was just like this, for me, a triple dose of misogyny and shame. And a lot of shame foisted on the female, on the female body, on female sexuality, on female power. So I was definitely on a mission to rebel against that as a young adult. But as I matured, I became much more interested in healing it as opposed to rebelling. And I really believe that as long as we've got sexual shame, which a lot of times can come from the way certain religions are interpreted and practiced, that we are going to continue to see perpetrations. I really believe that it's the shame that actually creates that fertile ground for a lack of clear boundaries and consent.
Wow. Well, we just have to look at what's been going on with the Catholic Church to have proof of that, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I think it's important to say generically that for myself personally, I'm certainly not anti-religion. I'm very pro-spirituality. Yeah. But it's the legislation of these values that become shaming and restricting and anti fill in the blank that are really harming people who are following these creeds, right?
And there's certain things, there are things that are changing. I think the Pope, the current Pope I think he's a miracle in himself. I'm really excited with a lot of the awarenesses that he's bringing to the fore. And I just watched a commencement speech from a young gay man at Brigham Young University. And and he was just cheered on by hundreds of classmates. So, and he was declaring that God created him gay, and I was just astounded because my grandmother was a Mormon. I would have never thought that this would happen at Brigham Young University, but it is.
Right, a Mormon university, right?
Yeah. So things are changing. Things are changing.
Yeah. Well, let's come back to what you position as what you really want to share with us. So there's a curious question you have, and it's the best ways to stop sex you have already started. So this is where the healing journey really begins, when you think you're in a boundary. I call it the big wide picture frame, and
Right.
something occurs and it either is outside of that picture frame or it's making the picture frame go crazy, wobbling
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
How
Well,
do you help clients with that?
well, I've got a 5-step process. Before I go into
Okay.
that, I want to like contextualize this. So it's my experience that once sex has begun, however you define that, a lot of people feel obligated. Now, maybe this points back to some codependent assumptions as well. But however you want to label that, it really doesn't matter. It is definitely going towards this direction of, well, we've already started it. I've already said yes to whatever I've said yes to. So to stop would be rude, or and there's a lot of mythology that goes along with that too, like the thing about blue balls, sexual frustration in men. It's not fair to them. I once right down to the point that if a man is inside the woman's vagina, you can't ask him to stop. And I disagree. I absolutely, positively disagree. If we don't have permission, if we don't have power and license to say no at any point at all, then we don't actually have full consent. So, and this is actually really easy to get past some of the assumptions that have come through our culture that pertain towards men and women. A lot of this stuff is gendered, but we can get past that if we just reverse it to something else. And I like to bring up the example of, what if your girlfriend was using a dildo on you as a man anally? Let's say she, bend over a boyfriend, whatever you relate to there. But she's strapped one on and she's penetrating you anally. Should you be able to say, I need to stop when you want to stop? And almost everybody agrees. Of course, because it might hurt. It might be that, you're not enjoying it, or it's gotten too rough or something. And at that point, the assumption right there is that because she's using a dildo, she won't experience any sexual frustration. So some of our ideas about consent are heavily gendered around the idea that a man's penis has got a mind of its own and cannot be told to stop. Or that it's rude or unconscionable or cruel to tell the penis to stop. And I'm really on a mission to say penises are not any more important than vaginas, and should not end up having a veto power during sexual intercourse. So, and that just kind of cuts through some of the gender bullshit, as far as I'm concerned. So regardless of your gender, however you identify, whether it's male, female, trans, whatever, I think it's important to know that your body is sacred, and you always, always, always have the power and permission to say no at any stage of the game. Now, how do we do that? The 5-step process that I teach, I call it the exquisite partnership formula. So it basically starts off with, the very first thing is, I want to validate. So let's take it away from sexual intercourse right now and just go to, my partner wants to do something sexual that I don't enjoy, and I have no openness to trying it. It's absolutely, positively beyond the pale. I will never be available for this sexual engagement, whatever it is. But they brought it to me. So the first thing I want to do is I want to validate them and say, wow, lots of people like doing that. I've read about that. I heard about that. I hear that it can be very enjoyable. And I totally understand why you would want to do that. So right away, we are greeting them with joy. Okay. And then the second thing I want to do is I want to appreciate them and go, how lucky I am that you brought that to me. How lucky I am that you want to do that with me, your partner. I just feel really loved and flattered and embraced by your desire. So that's the appreciation. And then right on the heels of that is your no. However, I'm not available to do that with you ever. So it's a very firm no. It's not mushy. It's not like maybe someday, or I don't know, let me think about that, or wow, I can't believe you brought that up. We don't go there. It's just, I got a firm no. Just like no. And it's very quick, okay? I'm not going to explain my no. I'm not going to linger on my no. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time agonizing about it or say, I hope you're not hurt. No, we don't even go there. The very next step is the redirect. And I just come right in and say, I won't do that. And there is something I have been dying to do with you, something I wanted to talk to you about. Would you like to hear what it is? Now, at that stage, almost everybody does want to hear it. They might still be stinging a little bit from your absolute rock solid no, but they're intrigued to find out what's the yes? What is it that you're inviting me into? And on the other hand, they could be a little pouty. And if they are pouty and they don't want to hear your redirect, then that's fine. Step 5 is invitation. And the invitation is to simply say, I know we love each other. Let's set aside a time to talk about the things we would like to do and the things we don't want to do. And I'm sure we'll find our way forward here. So the first 4, really, it's very quick. It doesn't take a lot of time to do this, but you have to kind of build a habit that I built over 14 years of being in the sex industry, because I didn't have the option of simply saying, no, get away from me. I was choosing to have these people and draw them close to me. And I learned to draw them close with joy, enthusiasm, and an absolutely positively rock solid no.
We don't do that here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there's so much noise around sexual agency, sexual empowerment, what's politically correct, consent, what's appropriate, the negotiation. If you think of what's going on in college campuses, people are signing contracts about, is it okay on the first date to hold my hand? I've been to conferences. I'm a sexologist, and I've seen people who are grown-ups, like in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who saw me at a conference a year ago, and actually, instead of and this is controversial what I'm going to say, instead of the natural human response, having just come back to a conference after losing my partner, whom they knew as well, saying, is it okay if I give you a hug? And that stopped me in my tracks. We're not even talking sex. We're talking consent for touch of any kind.
Yeah.
And in the awareness, I'm not going to say pre-Me Too, but the awareness of all this dialogue and noise, loud noise around consent, it would have been a human response to go like this. I'm so sorry for your loss, and give me a hug. That's the culture that we're living in today, systemically, worldwide. So I think when you look at how do you stop sex, what you're saying, what the picture you're painting is so honoring and so enlightened and so comprehensive in terms of relationship. But when it's a one-night encounter, or if it's somebody new and sex begins and you want to stop it, I think there's another layer to that. Don't you agree? It's that kind of having the conversation and let me invite you to that. I don't think that's going to happen. So how do you help people around that and the fallout of shame if I say to him, get off me, but you said, but how does that work?
So first of all, I wouldn't say get off me. And by the way, I hear what you're saying about this 5-step process. You're not thinking that would happen in a one-night stand. I certainly have done it hundreds of times with people that I'd only known for 5 minutes. So the way I teach it,
Yeah.
I know it is possible. But so let's just talk about the idea that you are somebody is engaging in intercourse and is on top of you, and suddenly you learn, you just become aware of the fact that you're not having a good time, or that you're freaking out, or you're feeling triggered, or whatever.
Or pain.
Yeah, yeah, or that it's hurting. I think there's two things that are really important. One, if you are having sex with this person, um, I hope that you actually feel safe enough to express your preferences. If you don't feel safe enough to express your preferences, then I think you need to reconsider having sex with this person. So that's kind of like a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you fall into bed and kind of get coerced into it because you've had a few drinks, this is not a good situation to be learning how to have boundaries. This is a place where you've set yourself up to be at risk. So first thing, make sure that you're having sex with people you can talk to, that you can say no to, that you can say yes to. I, as a sex educator, certainly some of my best sexual experiences have been when, if there was maybe even 4 or 5 of us, we'd get together and talk about what we were going to do, what we weren't going to do, our sexual histories, what kind of safer sex techniques we wanted to use. All that conversation took place before we touched each other. So I realize not everybody can do that. And particularly when I'm working with my clients, I don't expect them to have sex like sex educators do. But I certainly do want them to contextualize their sexual experiences with the minimum requirement that you can have a conversation about how you feel and what your preferences are before, during, and after sex. It should be before, during, and after sex. But here's, at the beginning we talked about why you can't have boundaries if you still have sexual shame. This is one of those reasons. If I'm too ashamed to admit that I have desire, well, then I put the pressure on you to seduce me and to try to intuit what it is that I want. I can't tell you what I want because I feel too ashamed to tell you what I want. So now I'm waiting for you to figure it out and kind of maybe even convince me, pull me into it so that I get permission to overcome my shame. And then when we're in the middle of it, now I'm confused. What did I really want this? And it's your fault. So, so to basically grow up and take responsibility is one way to keep yourself safe and have boundaries. But on the other side of this, we've got, of course, a formula for seduction that can look like convincing and tricking and trapping and trying to push edges. And regardless of your gender, that is out there. If you're in the role of the seducer, sometimes it's like this game that's going on. The person who's getting seduced and the person who's doing the seducing, there's a lot of unspoken terrain. So we need to start being able to talk about these things before, during, and after. If I were having sex with somebody that I just met and they were inside me and I suddenly realized that I was triggered, I would simply say, I'm triggered and I need to stop.
Very good. And assumedly that person will.
If they don't, then I somehow or another signed up to have sex with a rapist.
That's right. That's right.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, because no means no. But we also need, I do believe we need to get to an affirmative yes. But I don't like the legalistic approaches that I'm seeing about the affirmative yes for consent, because they have removed the lust and the romance. I think we need to be able to have romance. I don't always want it to be like, oh, we should ask for a kiss. I mean, ugh. And if that works for some people, may I kiss you? That's great. There's all kinds of formulas for that, but I think it's really important for us to be developing something else, Patti, and this is an empathetic, intuitive connection to each other. And we've got to train this and teach this and share this across the genders. This is another thing that I think has birthed the Me Too moment. And that is that the female culture, and I'm not assuming that this is about genitalia here. I'm just saying if you were raised, identified with the feminine culture, it's very intuitive. And when we read body language, we understand what a no looks like without it having a word. But if you weren't, if you were raised more masculine identified and you've kind of had your own connection to self kind of pummeled out of you so that you've been shamed around even having sensitive emotions, well, then guess what? The whole idea that somebody didn't say no, it eludes you. It's kind of like, well, and this is what I hear from the men. I hear this from the men all the time. Why don't they just have a firm no? I know what no sounds like. Why don't they just say no? But that kind of removes this juicy terrain of seduction and romance. So I would very much like for us to be able to move our culture into a place that's just a little more intuitive and connected. Monkeys do it. I think we humans can do it too. I think we can learn to read body language and facial expressions and voice and breath and understand what's going on with our partner even before they speak. And wouldn't that be wonderful to have sexual partners who are sensitive enough to realize that you're not present anymore, so I'm going to stop.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I understand bonobos do this. It's one of our nearest, closest primate relatives. So I don't think it's a big ask for human beings to be able to start doing that.
So talk about how sex can heal sexual trauma. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I sure can. I was 4 years clean and sober and in therapy as an incest survivor and a rape survivor when I became a high-end escort. One of the things that I was constantly accosted with was that somehow or another I was reenacting my trauma. And that wasn't my experience. I'm not saying that some people aren't doing that, but it certainly wasn't what I was doing. As a matter of fact, I found it incredibly healing. It was kind of like I'd been in therapy and I'd been reading all these self-help books, and then suddenly I was doing my lab work. And having this ability to have boundaries in a way that was creating heart connection and eroticism was just phenomenal. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I want to share that with people, that I work with sex addicts. I work with guys who feel imprisoned by their relationship with pornography and masturbation. Serious issues like losing jobs over it, losing wives and girlfriends over it, losing all their happiness and joy over it. And I don't usually take them to abstinence. I actually take them towards more masturbation. But I change the terms of it completely. I invite them to a sacred sexual connection to themselves. And we get away from the porn and we go towards conscious breathing exercises and elevate their orgasms to something that is much more spiritually sourced and much more connected to their emotional core. So it's kind of like if I were trying to work with a food addiction, you don't stop eating, right? Instead, you learn to have a different relationship with food.
Exactly.
So I want to help people not stop having sex, but just to change their relationship so that it's deepened and it's conscious and it's integrated, like what you're teaching, Patti.
Beautiful. So beautiful. Well, we only have about 6 minutes left, believe it or not.
Wow.
Before we open it up for comments and questions. And you have some other really great questions that you prepared. How do you get clear about what you really want and learn to scream and shout it as your boundary?
Well, I usually start with self-pleasuring rituals. I do. I want my clients to have a relationship with themselves and also whatever spirituality they embrace. So I actually believe that, you know, I've read research that supports the idea that a lot of fetuses might actually be masturbating in the womb, sometimes to the point of orgasm. And if that's true, which I think it is, then that kind of comes before our first breath of air, our first sip of mother's milk. And that means that it's central to our being. But it's a very intriguing thought. If that baby is not thinking about pornography or making another baby or falling in love or getting married or some romantic movie or some rape fantasy, none of that's there. What the hell's going on? And I like to try to take my clients back to that very, very early innocence. And once that occurs, once they get connected to that innocent part of themselves, they can start to realize that they've also got a connection to the divine through their sexuality. You know, the ancients used to talk about sex being a doorway to the divine. I happen to believe that's true. I've had lots of experiences. I call it my holy trinity, Patti. It's me, my beloved, and the divine. And that's where I go when I am in sexual union. And for me, it's my own religious experience, if you will. So
Beautiful.
yeah, I like to share that.
So, last question. What is the best way to create love, lust, and romance while staying anchored in your healthy boundaries? You've kind of answered that, but
I have. That's
as a kind of concluding remark, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I'd like to invite your students to go over to my website, The Shame-Free Zone, and get their copy of the Exquisite Partnership Formula, because it details those 5 steps in there. And I think developing an intuitive connection to sex is so important. We've gotten really disembodied as a species. We are so up in our heads, and we've become very verbally oriented. But sex is pre-verbal. So if we can start to develop an energetic sense of ourselves, which I really think is important, learning about body language, learning how to read facial expressions. You know, a large percentage of our population is becoming autistic, or they're somewhere on the autism spectrum too. So then that makes it more difficult to connect in those ways where we're actually in the body and we understand what other bodies are doing and saying. But I think it's really important for us to start finding ways to bring that into our culture as a species. So, I mean, it was there a very, very long time ago. That was all we had. And now it seems like we don't have much of a connection to it. And as I write this book, Patti, it's going to become more and more clear to me how to answer that question on a lot of different levels. At this point, the 5-step process of asserting a no while creating heart connection is a very important part of the book. And also trying to educate and re-educate people to their more intuitive, empathic sides is really important. But my fans, followers are going to help me write this book too. I'm asking them to pose questions, and I'll put this out to your students as well. I want as much feedback from the public as possible, because this is our shared journey. And right now I feel like there's more questions than answers.
That's beautiful. So where are you in the process of the book, just so that we all have an idea?
About 1/3 of the way through.
Okay, so you're open to input, and anyone who's
absolutely
watching
am. Absolutely.
How do they sign up to be part of a blog or a newsletter? What's the mechanism?
If you just go over to theshamefreezone.com, download your copy of the free ebook, which is, by the way, 10,000 words long and full color. It's gorgeous. Then you'll be put on the newsletter. But there's also we've also put right over on the right side of the page is about the book. And you can
Okay.
actually leave comments right there.
Excellent. Because it's not so easy to teach people how to read a body, how to read energies. And my experience clinically is that that's particularly something I hear from cisgendered men a lot, is that I don't know how to read cues. I don't know when a woman is interested in me. I don't know if what I'm doing is working. Without language, I think sometimes words actually get in the way of connection.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Which is why I'm hoping we can find a way forward that's affirmative consent without having to say, "May I touch your breast?"
Exactly. And may I do it for 2 seconds with my index finger if it has a temperature of, anyway, don't get me started.
Exactly.
But I like that you're really pursuing this, because I think it's a deficit in the how-to literature of how to teach people about sex and reading. And especially, I live in Southern California. I know it's really a warped environment, but every other person has no micro expressions because they're Botoxed up.
Oh,
so okay, so little injections all over where expressions would show. There aren't any. It's like, yes, that would be lovely. That's what's going on in my culture. I don't have any, by the way. I don't believe in it for me.
Me neither.
But it's everywhere. And in youth, even youth are, I have a wrinkle. Oh, I have on a contour. So we have lost, for a large body of the population here anyway, the ability to even express emotion, and micro expressions are eradicated because they're frozen. They're paralyzed.
You know what? I was thinking about that hug that you really wanted, that somebody asked you, "May I hug you?" And I personally don't find it offensive if somebody says, "May I hug you?" I'm like, "Yes, please."
Well, sometimes I need that, but not always. So this is about the cluelessness in reading.
Yes. Well, something I will sometimes do is that I just put my arms out like this. Mm-hmm. And you could come towards them or not. It's up to you. It's just available to you.
Yeah. But we're stuck in a culture that is requiring language. So even though many of us and our clients may go like that, I can't extend my arms all the way to this camera. What happens is, it's like, well, you didn't ask permission. So there's this tension, and then it's connected to shame about wanting or not knowing how. And so you're this, having shame be the core of the focus is so important. And you've really said so many important things to us today.
And fear, Patti. Fear.
Well, it's part of it.
Yeah. It's like we're afraid to have desire. We're afraid to have boundaries. We're afraid to speak our truth. We're afraid to say no. We're afraid to say yes. We're afraid to say, "I'd like to do this." And we're afraid. Yeah.
And then we feel shame if we do or we don't. So there it is. Oh, Veronica, I want to thank you so deeply for sharing not only your expertise and your experiences. Those really enriched what you had to share, but your wisdom, that I think I'm processing a lot of what we discussed today, because I think this is such a huge topic, and it's one where it's affecting everyone all over the world. And as sex coaches and sexologists, we're the ones who are going to sit in the room with people and help them navigate to the best of our ability to get to the best of their ability. So thank you so much. And hope that, all of us who are here can help you in creating this beautiful and important book, because we need to learn how to empathically know what's up or down. So that said,
and please, all your students, please send me emails at veronica@theshamefreezen.com with your comments, your questions, and your wisdom, so that I can take it forward out into the world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.